This is Cooker's Urban Homestead video blog for August 14th, 2011. I'm going to do a little update of my garden and yard and animals. We'll start over here with the side of the garden. I have my raspberries, and the one bush that made it last year is doing really well over there. And then my new ones are struggling along. Hopefully by next year they'll fill in that whole space. I have my herbs up here on the porch. I did have a basil in each one of these little pots, but there's a lot of toddlers that come around here and they got dug up. And then I have dill, lavender, thyme, rosemary, oregano up here. Those are all doing just fine. My beets, some nasturtium, which I planted kind of right up along the patio here where there's a shade lip, and that's doing quite well. I've tried other things there in the past and it mostly died. I planted some bush beans in this little empty space over here, and then I have cabbages, collards. Behind the collards over there in the shadow of it is red chard, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots. Everything's really started to take off in the last couple weeks. Here's the new trellis here covered in green beans, and I guess it really could have been a little taller because they've all grown over the top, flopped over, and they're growing back down again, but hopefully we get a lot of green beans there. The cucumbers, which are also doing really well. I really like growing them vertically like this. It's so tidy and clean. We've gotten quite a few cucumbers already, and there's a ton of baby ones. Here are my tomatoes. Again, I really love the vertical growing on these trellises. It supports the tomatoes and it gives them a lot of energy to grow straight up and become enormous plants. This is a the tallest one there is a yellow pear tomato, and it's huge. It's 9 feet tall at least. And the other ones here are 6 feet tall plus. The back there I have my asparagus. It's still getting established. We really haven't been able to pick any. Maybe by next year we'll get some that we can eat. And this little bed here, which has been struggling because it was kind of in a walkway and the kids didn't realize that there was stuff growing, so I made this little makeshift fence a few weeks ago, which has helped. I have some basil mixed in with parsnips. I planted a whole bunch of fennel over here, but I think the seeds were bad because only 2 came up, so I let those 2 fennel plants grow right there. In here is leeks. Also not doing very well. The moles came up through them and knocked them over. Maybe I'll get a few. More carrots. A little bit more nasturtium underneath the grapevine, which is also kind of in the shade at that low level. And here's the grapevine. We decided to just let it go ahead and cover the whole trellis to make it sort of decorative. I don't really expect any grapes until maybe next year, but it's looking nice. We have kale galore, beets, and I was trying to grow some celery from seed here. Celery takes off very slowly apparently. I planted the celery at the same time that I planted the beets, and the beets just have maybe 2 more weeks and the celery is still very small. Over here I have my squash. This vining squash here is a spaghetti squash, and it is doing really well. I have a couple of lovely looking pieces of fruits on it. Let's see if we can see one down there. There's one. And there's another one sitting up top over here. Hope we get a whole bunch. If we get enough winter squash and potatoes, we're going to build a cold storage bin, basically a garbage can dug into the ground for the winter. In there is my zucchini, and it's doing pretty well. And behind it is my yellow summer squash. It gets just slightly less sun, and I don't know if you can tell, but it is significantly smaller. There you go. Significantly smaller than the zucchini plant. But I've gotten one squash, and I'll probably get a few off of it. Over here's my lettuce bed. I pulled most of the things up and planted some new lettuce. So there'll be new butter leaf lettuce and maybe some herbs I think I planted in there too pretty soon. The broccoli is doing nicely. We've had a few meals of broccoli already. We're starting to get broccolini. This was a volunteer tomato plant that I transplanted. It's sort of struggling. if it gives us some tomatoes, good. This is my toddler, Olivine. Hey, Olivine, can you say hi?
Hi.
Let's go over here and look at the other garden bed. This other garden bed on the other side of the house had my onions and garlic in it, which I pulled all out yesterday because my dogs had trampled it and they really just weren't growing. I felt like I could get better yield out of this bed by planting a second round of some things. A month or so ago I planted some other sort of winter squash here. I can't remember the variety, but I planted as many as possible. I'm going to try to let them vine all out into the grass. Hopefully we get a good production out of that in late summer, early fall. Here I planted more bush beans, beets, a ton of basil and carrots. I would rather have those things than some struggling onions. There's one stray onion that's about as big as they all looked, and they were all had dead looking greens, and it was kind of sad.
Mommy!
Over here we did a different kind of trellis that we just sort of makeshifted. Some string, I'm going to pull the bottom, to hold all the tomatoes and squash that I planted in this little raised bed over here. This little spot here happens to get sun in our yard. It's one of the few spots. These 4 tomato plants were volunteers that I transplanted from the garden. I think they're all yellow pear tomatoes from where I had my plant last year. But they look really nice. Right there's another volunteer tomato. I have no idea what variety that one is, since it grew there on its own and I've never had tomatoes growing there. Came out of the compost. I had so many volunteer tomato plants this year that I had to try to move some around, but they're significantly more behind the tomato starts that I bought at the store, but they still look very healthy and good. Here is a lemon cucumber I planted, I don't know, 4 or 6 weeks ago, so you can see it's still small, hasn't produced anything. This is another winter squash here. I'm trying to grow it up instead. We're going to see how that goes. I don't know if it's going to be able to support fruit. I might have to like hang it, put little or like a little sling on each fruit, try to keep it steady. And then there is my Jerusalem artichoke or sunchokes. It was an experiment. They're pretty invasive, so I have a feeling that it's going to take over this whole bed, which I decided was okay. And if we don't want them there, we're going to put in a barrier or like a plastic sheet to keep them segregated to one section. Here are my potato condos, which look fantastic. We're hoping that there's a ton of potatoes in there. Last year we tried this and it didn't work at all. This year we were much more on top of it and added dirt every few days. Theoretically, this box should have enough potatoes to make it through winter for us, or more to give away. The plants look excellent. Most of them are done flowering. There's just a few flowers left. Well, I'm just going to let it keep going, and we'll take all the potatoes out at once and then put them in cold storage. These plants over here are gooseberries. They're doing quite well, and the gooseberries are pretty tasty. Everybody likes to eat them. Here's my cherry tree. The goats have gotten out several times and eaten all the lower leaves off of it, which is sad. Hopefully it will recover. We're going to really prune it back this year to make it a more reasonable shape. And we have fenced off just the back part of the yard for the goats now, which is keeping them in. They were jumping the fence on a regular basis. And my husband made this freestanding gate, which is much nicer. It's easier to go in and out through the electric fence. And back here we have the goats and the baby goats. See if we can find them. There's Lola. Oh, there's the babies. And they're 3 weeks old now. I'm going to start milking Mama soon. right. I think that's pretty much a good sum up of everything that's going on. Thanks for watching.